Joppa Cemetery is one of the oldest and most historic graveyards in Davie County. While some people visit to see the resting place of their ancestors, because of the cemetery's age, some come in search of ghosts. However, surprisingly, there is another group of people who visit here, and that is those who love history, particularly the history of North Carolina as a frontier, and that of one of the most famous frontiersmen, Daniel Boone. In 1720, Squire Boone married Sarah in Pennsylvania. While there, Squire worked as a weaver, blacksmith, and farmer. During their marriage, Squire and Sarah had 11 children, of which 9, including Daniel, were born in Pennsylvania. When it came time for the eldest of the Boone children to marry, their children, Sarah and Israel, married non-Quakers. This and the increasing population put extreme pressure on the Boone family, so they decided to leave. On April 11th of 1750, the Boones sold their 158-acre farm. And on May 1st of 1750, they set out for the frontier of North Carolina. Shortly after beginning their journey, the Boones stopped in Virginia and stayed there for some time before moving on. By 1752, the Boones had made their way to North Carolina and were living in a cave in Davison County while they had a cabin built. Eventually, the family became some of the earliest settlers in the forks of the Yadkin, and Squire became a prominent figure in Rowan County when it was formed in 1753. In fact, that year, Squire became justice of the first Rowan County courts. It was around that time that their eldest son, Israel, had to be taken to the town of Bethabara. Notably, without stops, that was a 10-hour walk. But it was the location of the only doctor in the area. Unfortunately, the doctor discovered Israel had consumption, which would result in a long and painful death. Later, because of the French and Indian War, it is also believed that the Boone family, like others at the time, went back to Bethabara for the protection of their palisade walls. In addition, it is also believed that they may have took refuge at Fort Dobbs. On June 12th of 1756, Martha, the wife of Israel, passed. She was only 28. Sadly, only 15 days later, Israel finally succumbed to his tuberculosis. He was only 30 years old. Unfortunately, the deaths of Martha and Israel left their 4 children orphaned. On a happier note, in August of that year, Daniel married Rebekah in a ceremony officiated by Daniel's father, Squire. Instead of a honeymoon, Daniel and Rebekah set forth by adopting Israel's 4 children. By 1759, the conflict between the settlers and the indigenous people got so bad that Squire and Sarah left for Maryland. In doing so, they gave Daniel some of their land. Daniel and his family continued to live in North Carolina, where he honed his skills as a hunter. Then, in his early 20s, when North Carolina became too populated, he moved westward. In the spring of 1764, Squire and Sarah Boone returned to North Carolina. Unfortunately, the following year, Squire passed away at their Buffalo Licks home. He was 68. Sarah, on the other hand, lived to be 76 when she passed away in 1777. Of course, it is because of this notable family that Joppa Cemetery has become a popular tourist destination. In a Charlotte Observer article written by Joe DePriest, every cemetery has its secrets. But it is no secret that the parents of the early American explorer Daniel Boone, Squire, and Sarah are buried in Joppa Cemetery off of US 601 in Monksville. A state historic marker has pointed that out for decades. The Boone connection definitely sets Joppa apart. But most of those who are teaching North Carolina history are expanding on the history of this cemetery. In fact, they are probing into other names on weathered gravestones, compiling snapshots of an important pioneer community in the forks of the Yadkin. Knowing more about this small burial ground can help us better understand the dynamics of change that swept the Carolinas. Traveling the Great Wagon Road in the mid-1700s, thousands of settlers from Pennsylvania and Virginia passed through the area between the Yadkin and the South Yadkin rivers. Some, like the Boones, stayed on. Joppa Presbyterian Church became a landmark, a place that young Daniel Boone knew well. The little church at the forks of the Yadkin is long gone, and development now surrounds the cemetery, which is maintained by volunteers. There is a list of people buried here, but there is little information about who they were. In June, a group of students began searching in library and courthouse records in Davie and Rowan counties, looking for anything they could to find out more about the names on Joppa's tombstones. Fascinating fragments turned up. They learned a man named P.F. Maroney was Thomas Jefferson's nephew, and Thomas and Rufus Brown were heirs to the Brown and Brown tobacco fortune, a frontrunner for R.J. Reynolds. There is also a relative of Hinton Rowan Helper, a Southern critic of slavery and author of The Impending Crisis of the South. Soldiers from the Revolutionary and Civil War share spaces under the oaks and cedars. The main goal of this project is to gather enough information to get the cemetery on the National Register of Historic Places, thus expanding its protection. There is also a hope that the new research will raise awareness and help more people appreciate the significance of an old burial ground along a busy highway. In this article, the author meets with a teacher named Hager at the Joppa Cemetery one afternoon when the heat hung heavy and the cicadas whined in the trees. The author then continues with no-see-ums nipped at my bare arms as we walk by the Boone's original tombstones, protected from the elements and vandals by modern brick encasement. Traditional lore has it that Daniel Boone carved the inscriptions and that two of his brothers are buried here nearby in unmarked graves. I notice a bouquet of wilted roses atop the brick monument. Visitors come here from all over the country. It's the jumping off place for the young settler who left home to become an American icon. Hagar discovered Joppa as a child. He grew up in Goldsboro, but traveled US 601 with his parents on trips to visit relatives in western North Carolina. By the time he first saw the highway marker, Hagar was already a Daniel Boone fanatic. Hagar was concerned about the proposed road from a development that could threaten Joppa. He asked the state archaeologist for advice about how to protect the cemetery. He came up with a plan to find out something about everybody buried in the cemetery and wanted to get his students involved. No test in this class, he told them, but you may have to sweat a little. Marie Barnes, head of the Cemetery Committee of the North Carolina Department of Archives and History, spoke to the class about how to document a graveyard. Then the students went to work, not at Joppa at first, but in the public records. Weeks later, when they finally made it to the cemetery, it was no strange place to them. Many names belonged to the Great Wagon Road travelers who stopped at the forks of the Yadkin in the 1750s and instead of moving on, settled there. The nearest town was Salisbury, about 30 miles away. The next closest was Winchester, Virginia. After searching records, students got a clear picture of what life was like in the wilderness. Families were ravaged by disease. There was a high infant mortality rate. Women were dying during childbirth. Curie Christmas of Granite Falls found one couple who had 7 children, 6 of whom died before their first birthday, and the 7th died at age 11. Exploring Joppa's history has been a deep experience, said Christmas. Joppa is a quiet place. Big trees filter out much of the highway noise. You feel lost in another world. Standing by the Boone's graves, I looked across a nearby shopping center parking lot and half expected to see Daniel himself striding across the pavement. If I had, Hagar told me, Boone would not have been a towering legend trotting with a giant musket. He would have been just an average guy with an average gun, like most of those buried around me in Joppa. Average people who, in their own way, did extraordinary things in the wilderness. Hagar's students are still looking into the names on Joppa's stones. They also want to learn about the slaves buried nearby in unmarked graves. An archaeological phase begins in the fall, and they will be digging for relics that may help add to the story. For the researchers, Joppa has become almost like a family cemetery. Hagar and his students are providing a valuable service to the people of North Carolina. The new material unearthed from public records and the cemetery will be available at the local libraries and Lenoir-Rhyne University. It will be accessible for others doing research in the future. The Joppa Project takes history to another level by making it personal. In conclusion, I hope that what I've shared with you today will inspire you to visit Joppa Cemetery or many of the other Daniel Boone sites. If you enjoyed this video, please like it, and as always, thanks for watching.